Sarah Mitchell's hands trembled as she straightened her only formal blazer, a navy blue piece she had bought from a thrift store last week. The courthouse's massive wooden doors stood before her like giants, making her feel smaller than she already did. At 34, this single mother of two had never imagined she would have to fight a legal battle against the very hospital where she had worked as a dedicated nurse for the past 8 years. Her best friend, Lisa, squeezed her shoulder gently. "You can do this, Sarah. Remember why you're here." Sarah nodded, thinking of her two children, Emma, age 9, and Tommy, age 6, who were currently at school, unaware that their mother was about to face one of the biggest challenges of her life. 3 months ago, Sarah's life had changed dramatically. During her night shift at City General Hospital, she had been using a patient lift machine to help move an elderly patient. The equipment, which she had reported as faulty multiple times, finally gave out completely. As the machine failed, Sarah had acted quickly, using her own body to prevent the patient from falling. While she had saved the patient from injury, she had severely hurt her back in the process. Now, walking into courtroom 7B, Sarah could still feel the lingering pain in her lower back. The hospital's insurance company had denied her workers' compensation claim, forcing her to take unpaid leave. Her savings were running out, and the mounting medical bills kept her awake at night. As Sarah and Lisa found their seats, the opposing counsel, James Wheeler, strutted into the courtroom. Everything about him screamed expensive, from his perfectly tailored charcoal gray suit to his leather briefcase that probably cost more than 3 months of Sarah's rent. He barely glanced in her direction, but when he did, his lips curled into a slight smirk that made Sarah's stomach turn. "All rise for the Honorable Judge Patricia Henderson," the bailiff announced. The judge, a stern-looking woman in her 60s, took her place at the bench. Sarah noticed how she commanded respect without saying a word. Wheeler stood up first, his voice smooth and practiced. "Your Honor, we're here today because Ms. Mitchell is claiming an injury that she alleges occurred due to equipment failure. However, we believe this is nothing more than an opportunistic attempt to extract money from a respected healthcare institution." Sarah felt her cheeks burn as Wheeler continued. "The plaintiff, a single mother of two, seems to be looking for what she might consider an easy solution to her financial situation." His emphasis on single mother made it sound like a character flaw. The public defender assigned to Sarah's case, Mr. Thompson, was a kind but overworked man in his early 50s. He stood up, shuffling his papers. "Your Honor, my client was injured while saving a patient from harm. She has documented the equipment issues multiple times before the incident." Wheeler's laugh was subtle but cruel. "Documented? You mean the maintenance requests that mysteriously can't be found in the hospital system? How convenient." He turned to give Sarah a condescending look. Perhaps Ms. Mitchell was too busy with her personal responsibilities to properly file these supposed reports. Judge Henderson frowned slightly. "Mr. Wheeler, watch your tone. Let's stick to the facts of the case." Sarah sat quietly, her hands clasped tightly in her lap. Beneath her calm exterior, her mind was racing. Wheeler didn't know about the copies of maintenance requests she had photographed on her phone. He didn't know about the emails she had forwarded to her personal account, documenting her concerns about the equipment. Most importantly, he didn't know about the other nurses who were willing to testify about similar issues with the same machine. As Wheeler continued his opening statement, painting her as an opportunist looking for easy money, Sarah thought about her children. She thought about how Emma had offered her piggy bank savings to help with the bills, and how Tommy had promised to eat less snacks to save money. These thoughts didn't make her feel weak. They made her more determined. Lisa passed her a tissue, and Sarah realized a tear had escaped despite her best efforts. But this wasn't a tear of defeat. This was the beginning, not the end. Wheeler might have his expensive suit and his practiced smirk, but Sarah had something more valuable: the truth, evidence, and a mother's determination to fight for what was right. The first day of the trial was just beginning, and Sarah Mitchell was ready for the battle ahead. The second day of the trial started with dark clouds hanging over the courthouse, matching the tension in courtroom 7B. Sarah Mitchell arrived earlier than necessary, wearing the same blazer but with a different blouse she had borrowed from Lisa. Her friend couldn't be there today. She was watching Sarah's kids before school started. James Wheeler was already there, talking and laughing with his two junior associates. When Sarah walked in, he looked her up and down, then whispered something to his colleagues that made them chuckle. Sarah held her head high and took her seat, remembering Lisa's words. "Don't let them see you sweat." "The defense calls Ms. Mitchell to the stand," Wheeler announced once the proceedings began. Sarah's heart pounded as she walked to the witness box. After she was sworn in, Wheeler approached with a smile that didn't reach his eyes. "Ms. Mitchell," he began, pacing slowly. "Tell us about your typical day. What time do you wake up?" Sarah's public defender, Mr. Thompson, stood up. "Objection, Your Honor." "Relevance?" "I'm establishing the witness's daily routine as it relates to her alleged exhaustion on the day of the incident," Wheeler explained smoothly. Judge Henderson nodded. "I'll allow it, but keep it brief, Mr. Wheeler." "I wake up at 5:30 a.m., Sarah answered clearly. "So early?" Wheeler's voice dripped with fake concern. "And why is that?" "I need to get my children ready for school before I go to work." Wheeler nodded dramatically. "Ah, yes, your 2 children, and their father. He doesn't help with this morning routine." Mr. Thompson jumped up again. "Objection. The children's father has no bearing on this case." "Sustained," Judge Henderson said firmly. "Mr. Wheeler, stick to relevant questions." But Wheeler had achieved his goal. Several jury members were already exchanging looks. He changed tactics, picking up a paper from his desk. "Ms. Mitchell, your work records show you picked up extra shifts in the months before your alleged injury. Were you perhaps tired during these shifts? Maybe a bit careless?" Sarah kept her voice steady. "I took extra shifts because the hospital was understaffed. I was never careless with patient safety." Wheeler raised his eyebrows. "Never careless? Yet you claim you couldn't operate the simple lift machine correctly." "The machine was faulty," Sarah responded. "I had reported it multiple times." "Ah, yes, these mysterious reports that no one can find." Wheeler walked to his desk and picked up another document. "You know what I did find, though? Your credit card statements." Sarah's stomach dropped. Mr. Thompson stood up immediately. "Objection. This is harassment." "Your Honor," Wheeler said smoothly, "I'm establishing a pattern of financial desperation that motivated this fraudulent claim." The judge's eyes narrowed. "Watch yourself, Mr. Wheeler. But I'll allow it. For now." Wheeler turned back to Sarah, his expensive shoes clicking on the floor. 3 overdue payments on your credit card. Late rent last month. A declined transaction at the grocery store. He listed each item like he was reading a criminal record. Quite a difficult situation for a single mother, isn't it? Sarah felt her cheeks burn, but she remembered her children's faces. She wouldn't let this man shame her for working hard to support her family. "Yes, Mr. Wheeler," she said clearly, "being a single mother is difficult, but it's also taught me responsibility. I would never file a false claim. I reported that machine because it was dangerous. I got hurt saving a patient from falling when it failed." Wheeler laughed, actually laughed, in the courtroom. How noble. The single mother, struggling to make ends meet, just happens to get injured in a way that could lead to a big insurance payout. And now she's painting herself as a hero. "Mr. Wheeler." Judge Henderson's voice cracked like a whip. "That's enough. One more comment like that, and I'll hold you in contempt." But Wheeler just smiled and adjusted his tie. "No further questions, Your Honor." As he walked back to his seat, he paused and whispered, just loud enough for Sarah to hear, "Good luck paying those bills without this settlement." Sarah stepped down from the witness stand, her legs shaking but her spine straight. Wheeler might think he had won this round with his cruel mockery, but he didn't know what was coming. In her worn purse, safely tucked in a folder, was evidence that would wipe that smirk right off his face. She just had to wait for the right moment. That evening, after the harsh day in court, Sarah sat at her small kitchen table. Her children were finally asleep, and the only sound was the quiet hum of her old laptop. The screen's glow lit up the scattered papers, folders, and notebooks that covered the table's surface. This had been her nightly routine for the past 3 months, her secret weapon that Wheeler knew nothing about. On the wall behind her, a large calendar hung with dates circled in red. Each circle marked a night when Sarah had stayed up until 2 a.m., researching similar court cases and studying relevant laws. Empty coffee cups still sat on the counter, evidence of her late-night study sessions. But it wasn't just random research. Sarah had a system. She opened her detailed notebook, where she had organized everything into clear sections. The first part contained all her medical records, carefully arranged by date. Sarah had learned early in her nursing career how important proper documentation was. She had photos of her injuries, doctor's notes, and even a daily pain level diary that her doctor had praised for its thoroughness. Next to her laptop sat a thick blue folder. Inside were printed copies of every email she had ever sent about the faulty equipment. 3 months of gathering evidence, she whispered to herself, touching the folder gently. Let's see Wheeler mock this. Her phone buzzed, a text from Lisa. You okay after today? That lawyer was horrible. Sarah smiled as she typed back. I'm okay, just working on the case. Wheeler doesn't know what's coming. She turned back to her work, opening a spreadsheet she had created. In it, she had tracked every incident involving the same patient lift machine over the past year. As a nurse, she had access to incident reports, and she had carefully noted each one before taking her leave. The pattern was clear. The machine had been problematic for months before her injury. From the living room, she heard Emma cough in her sleep. Sarah paused, listening to make sure her daughter was okay. The sound reminded her why she was fighting so hard. On the kitchen counter, she could see Emma's latest school art project, a drawing of their family with "World's Best Mom" written in crooked letters. Next to it was Tommy's math test with a big A+, which he had proudly shown her just hours ago. Sarah turned back to her laptop and opened a document titled Legal Precedents. During her research, she had discovered 3 similar cases where equipment failure had led to worker injuries. In 2 of those cases, the courts had ruled in favor of the injured workers. She had printed out these case summaries and highlighted the key points that matched her situation. Her back started to ache, a reminder of why she was doing all this. Sarah stood up to stretch, walking to the window. The street was quiet, most houses dark. In Wheeler's world, this would be when the expensive law firm's cleaning crew would be tidying up, getting ready for another day of defending big corporations. But in Sarah's world, this was when real preparation happened. She returned to the table and pulled out another folder, this one containing statements from her coworkers. 5 other nurses had agreed to testify about the equipment issues. They had all signed notarized statements describing their own experiences with the faulty lift. Wheeler might be able to dismiss one person's claims, but he couldn't ignore 5 witnesses. The clock on the wall showed 11:30 p.m. Sarah knew she should sleep. Tomorrow would be another challenging day in court. But first, she opened one final document. It was her timeline of events, meticulously crafted to show how the hospital had repeatedly ignored safety concerns. Every date was verified, every claim backed by evidence. You think I'm just a desperate single mom, Mr. Wheeler, Sarah muttered as she reviewed her work. But I've been a nurse for 12 years. I know how to document everything. I know how to build a case. And tomorrow, you'll start to see just how wrong you were. She finally closed her laptop at midnight, her mind already running through tomorrow's strategy. Wheeler had his expensive education and designer suits, but Sarah had something more valuable. The truth, carefully documented and organized, ready to be revealed at just the right moment. The courtroom buzzed with tension on the 3rd day of the trial. Wheeler stood confidently at the front, setting up a large screen with his usual smug smile. Sarah sat quietly beside Mr. Thompson, wearing a simple gray dress she had ironed twice that morning. Your Honor, Wheeler announced, his voice full of triumph. The defense would like to present crucial evidence. He clicked a remote, and grainy security camera footage appeared on the screen. This video was taken exactly 1 week after Ms. Mitchell's supposed injury. The footage showed Sarah walking in the hospital parking lot, carrying a small grocery bag. She moved slowly but steadily, without any visible signs of severe pain. Wheeler let the video play for a full minute, then turned to face the jury with a theatrical gesture. Ladies and gentlemen, he said, spreading his arms wide. Does this look like someone with a serious back injury? Someone who claims she can barely move without pain? He pointed at Sarah. Or does this look like someone trying to fool us all? Mr. Thompson started to stand, but Sarah touched his arm gently. It's okay, she whispered. I was waiting for this. When it was their turn, Sarah calmly walked to her bag and pulled out a thick medical file. Your Honor, may I present something? Judge Henderson nodded, and Sarah handed copies to the court clerk to distribute. What you're looking at, she explained in a clear, professional voice, is my complete medical recovery plan, signed by Dr. James Anderson, one of the city's top physical therapists. She stood straight, her nursing experience showing in her confident tone. On page 3, you'll see Dr. Anderson's specific instructions for my recovery. You required me to do graduated movement exercises, including short walks with minimal weight, to prevent muscle atrophy. Wheeler's smile faltered slightly as Sarah continued. She pulled out her phone and opened her photo gallery. With my doctor's permission, I documented my entire recovery process. She handed the phone to the clerk, who connected it to the courtroom display. The screen now showed a series of time-stamped photos, Sarah doing gentle exercises, her physical therapy sessions, and daily progress pictures of her injury. Each photo included a dated note from her therapist or doctor. The video Mr. Wheeler showed, Sarah explained, looking directly at the jury, was taken during one of my prescribed walking sessions. My doctor specifically instructed me to carry no more than 2 pounds to maintain normal movement patterns while healing. She held up a receipt from that day. The bag contained 2 apples and a small carton of juice. Total weight, 1.8 pounds. Wheeler's face reddened. Objection, Your Honor. This evidence wasn't submitted during discovery. Actually, Mr. Thompson spoke up, shuffling through his papers. It was included in our medical documentation package, page 47. We can't help it if you didn't read it thoroughly. Judge Henderson reviewed the documents. Objection overruled. Continue, Ms. Mitchell. Sarah clicked to the next photo, showing her physical therapy exercises. My doctor designed a careful recovery plan to prevent long-term disability. Following this plan didn't mean I wasn't injured. It meant I was doing exactly what medical professionals recommended to heal properly. She then displayed a graph showing her pain levels and medication usage over time. I tracked everything, as my nursing training taught me to do. Every pill, every exercise, every moment of pain, all documented and verified by medical professionals. Wheeler stood again, his composure slipping. Your Honor, this is clearly a staged documentation process created after the fact. Actually, Sarah replied calmly, pulling out one more document. Here's a letter from Dr. Anderson, dated the day of my injury, outlining this exact documentation process as part of my recovery plan. He's waiting outside if you'd like to verify this with him personally. The jury members leaned forward, several of them nodding approvingly. One juror, a nurse herself, was taking detailed notes. Wheeler's attempt to discredit Sarah had backfired spectacularly, transforming into proof of her professionalism and credibility. As Sarah returned to her seat, she caught Wheeler's eye. For the first time, she saw something new in his expression: worry. His trump card had just been turned against him, and they both knew this was just the beginning of her evidence. On the 4th day of the trial, Sarah arrived at the courthouse with a small silver USB drive in her hand. Her children had wished her extra luck that morning, with Tommy giving her his favorite superhero keychain for power. The small plastic Superman now hung from the USB drive, catching the morning light. Wheeler was already in the courtroom, huddled with his team. He looked less polished today, his tie slightly crooked, dark circles under his eyes, suggesting late nights of emergency preparation after yesterday's setback. He barely glanced up when Sarah entered. Your Honor, Sarah's lawyer, Mr. Thompson, began once court was in session. We'd like to present evidence regarding the hospital's safety meetings. Wheeler immediately stood up. Objection. There's no record of these meetings in the evidence list. Sarah pulled out the USB drive, Superman keychain dangling. Actually, there is. Her voice was steady, confident. For the past year, I recorded every monthly safety meeting. Our state's laws allow recording if at least one party is aware of it. Judge Henderson examined the law book Mr. Thompson quickly provided. She's correct. Objection overruled. The color drained from Wheeler's face as Sarah plugged in the USB drive. The courtroom speakers crackled to life with the first recording. Safety meeting, January 15th, a voice announced. Discussion of equipment maintenance budget cuts. The recording continued, revealing hospital administrators discussing the patient lift equipment. We can postpone the maintenance for another quarter, one voice said. Save some money for the new wing construction. Sarah played 5 more clips, each carefully selected. They showed a clear pattern, repeated warnings about the equipment, budget discussions putting costs over safety, and administrators dismissing concerns. In this next recording, Sarah explained, clicking to a new file, you can hear me specifically reporting issues with the lift that later failed. The audio played her voice clearly describing the problems, followed by a supervisor saying they'd get to it when the budget allows. Wheeler jumped up again. Your Honor, this is clearly edited material. Sarah calmly pulled out another document. I had these recordings authenticated by an audio forensics expert. His certification and full analysis are here, confirming no editing or manipulation. As the next recording played, Sarah watched several jury members shaking their heads in disapproval at the hospital's negligence. One juror, an older man, was writing furiously in his notepad. And this final recording, Sarah said, clicking one last time, is from 2 weeks before my injury. The room fell silent as they heard Sarah again, this time practically begging for the equipment to be fixed. Someone is going to get hurt, her recorded voice warned. Wheeler's team was now frantically flipping through papers, whispering urgently among themselves. Their carefully constructed defense was crumbling with each played recording. Miss Mitchell, Judge Henderson asked, why did you start recording these meetings? Sarah stood straight, her nurse's training showing in her professional demeanor. In my 12 years of nursing, I learned that good documentation saves lives. When I first noticed the equipment issues, I started recording meetings to protect my patients and my colleagues. She pulled out one final paper, a hospital policy document. According to the hospital's own safety protocols, dangerous equipment should be replaced within 48 hours of being reported. These recordings span 11 months of reports about the same piece of equipment. Wheeler loosened his tie, sweat visible on his forehead. His junior associates were already pulling out their phones, likely messaging the hospital's executives about this devastating turn of events. Furthermore, Sarah continued, her voice growing stronger, I'm not the only nurse who reported these issues. She gestured to the back of the courtroom, where 3 of her colleagues sat in their nursing uniforms, ready to testify. They had come straight from their shifts to support her. As Sarah returned to her seat, she caught a glimpse of Wheeler. The smug lawyer who had mocked her status as a single mother was gone. In his place sat a man who realized he had severely underestimated his opponent. Sarah touched Tommy's Superman keychain and smiled slightly. Sometimes superpowers came in unexpected forms, like a nurse's attention to detail and a mother's determination to fight for what's right. On the 5th day of the trial, Wheeler tried one last desperate move. He called Mike Rogers, the hospital's former maintenance worker, to the stand. Wheeler had spent the entire night preparing this witness, hoping to discredit Sarah's evidence about the faulty equipment. Mr. Rogers, Wheeler began, his voice carrying a hint of his old confidence. How long did you work in maintenance at City General Hospital? 8 years, Mike answered, shifting uncomfortably in his seat. And in those 8 years, did you ever find any serious problems with the patient lift equipment? Wheeler asked, pacing slowly. Mike glanced at Wheeler, then at Sarah, then back at his hands. No, not that I remember. Wheeler smiled for the first time that day. So Ms. Mitchell's claims about repeatedly reported issues are false. Before Mike could answer, Sarah leaned over and whispered something to Mr. Thompson. He nodded and stood up. Your Honor, may we present new evidence? Wheeler's smile vanished. Objection. They can't keep pulling out surprise evidence. But Sarah was already walking forward with a thick manila envelope. These are maintenance request forms signed by Mr. Rogers himself. We obtained them through a formal records request from the hospital's archive database. The judge examined the documents and nodded. Objection overruled. These were properly submitted during discovery. Sarah approached Mike with the maintenance forms. Each paper had his signature at the bottom, along with detailed notes about the lift equipment's problems. Mr. Rogers, is this your signature? Mike's face turned red. He looked at Wheeler, who was now gripping the edge of his table. Yes, that's my signature. And these notes about the lift being dangerous, did you write those? Mike took a deep breath. Yes, I did. Sarah then pulled out a series of emails. These are messages you sent to hospital administration, warning them about the equipment. You sent 15 separate warnings in the last year alone. The courtroom was silent as Mike looked at the emails. Wheeler stood up, his expensive suit now wrinkled from stress. Your Honor, this witness was clearly coerced by the plaintiff. Judge Henderson's eyes narrowed. That's a serious accusation, Mr. Wheeler. Do you have evidence? Wheeler opened his mouth, then closed it. He had nothing. Sarah continued gently, Mr. Rogers, why did you initially say you didn't remember any problems? Mike looked at Wheeler, then straightened his shoulders. The hospital's lawyers told me I might lose my pension if I didn't help their case. Gasps filled the courtroom. Wheeler's junior associates started frantically writing notes. Judge Henderson's face darkened. Mr. Wheeler, we'll discuss witness tampering in my chambers later. But Sarah wasn't finished. She projected a new document onto the courtroom screen. This is Mr. Rogers' termination letter from 3 months ago. The reason? Excessive reporting of equipment issues. Mike nodded, his voice stronger now. They fired me because I wouldn't stop filing reports about the dangerous equipment. I had worked there 8 years, had a perfect record. But they said I was causing trouble by insisting on safety repairs. Sarah then showed a series of photographs. Mr. Rogers, did you take these pictures of the faulty lift? Yes, he replied. I took photos every time I filed a report. Started doing it after they claimed they lost my first few maintenance requests. The jury members were all leaning forward now, several taking rapid notes. One juror, an older man who had worked in construction, was nodding knowingly at the maintenance details in the photos. Wheeler tried one last time. Your Honor, this is all circumstantial. Is it? Sarah interrupted, pulling out one final document. It was Mike's detailed maintenance log, showing dates, times, and specific problems with the equipment. Mr. Rogers kept this log for years. Every entry is dated, every issue documented. The equipment that injured me had been reported faulty 17 times. Wheeler slumped in his chair, knowing his case was falling apart. His attempt to discredit Sarah through Mike Rogers had backfired spectacularly. Instead of destroying her evidence, he had helped prove her case about the hospital's negligence. Sarah thanked Mike and returned to her seat. As she passed Wheeler's table, she heard him muttering to his associates about damage control. The tables had turned completely, and everyone in the courtroom knew it. On the 6th day of the trial, Sarah arrived early with a stack of papers she had discovered during another late-night research session. Her children had made her breakfast that morning, slightly burnt toast, and a crooked smiley face made of fruit. That simple meal had given her the strength for what she was about to reveal. Your Honor, Sarah began once court was in session. I'd like to present evidence about other cases involving the same equipment manufacturer. Wheeler jumped up so fast he knocked over his water glass. Objection. Other cases are not relevant to this one. Sarah remained calm, remembering her children's encouraging words. Your Honor, these cases show a pattern of negligence and cover-ups, all involving Wheeler's law firm. Judge Henderson studied Sarah carefully. I'll allow it, but tread carefully, Ms. Mitchell. Sarah nodded and began distributing documents to the jury. 3 cases in the past year involved injuries from the same model of patient lift. All 3 cases were handled by Wheeler's firm. All 3 cases were settled quietly with strict confidentiality agreements. Wheeler's face turned pale. His junior associates exchanged worried looks. In the first case, Sarah continued, displaying documents on the screen. A nurse named Maria Rodriguez was injured. Wheeler's firm convinced her to settle for a small amount, hiding the fact that the equipment had known defects. She clicked to the next slide. Second case, David Chen, another nurse. Same equipment, same injury pattern, same quiet settlement. She paused, looking directly at Wheeler. Same law firm. Wheeler stood again, his voice shaking slightly. Your Honor, these cases are protected by confidentiality agreements. Actually, Sarah replied, pulling out another document. I'm only sharing public records. Court filings are public information, Mr. Wheeler. I just had to know where to look. She displayed a timeline on the screen. Notice how each case was settled quickly, with the same pattern. The injured worker was approached within days of their injury, pressured to settle, and made to sign a confidentiality agreement. The jury was completely focused now, several members giving Wheeler disapproving looks. But here's the most interesting part, Sarah said, revealing her final piece of evidence. I found a connection between Wheeler's law firm and the equipment manufacturer. They shared the same parent company. The courtroom erupted in murmurs. Wheeler's face went from pale to ghostly white. "This means," Sarah explained, her voice growing stronger, "that every time Wheeler's firm handled one of these cases, they were actually defending their own company's faulty equipment. They weren't just the hospital's lawyers, they were protecting their own interests." She projected emails she had uncovered through public records requests. "These communications show the law firm was specifically chosen because of this connection. They weren't hired to ensure justice, they were hired to keep these equipment failures quiet." Wheeler was frantically whispering to his team, papers shuffling rapidly between them. "Your Honor," Sarah continued, "I have here depositions from the previous cases. Each injured worker describes the same tactics: mockery in court, personal attacks, attempts to shame them into settling quickly." She turned to face Wheeler directly. "The same tactics Mr. Wheeler tried to use against me, mocking my status as a single mother, suggesting I was desperate for money." Judge Henderson was reading through the documents with growing concern. "Mr. Wheeler, care to explain this apparent conflict of interest?" Wheeler stood, tugging at his collar. "Your Honor, these are merely coincidental similarities." "Coincidental?" Sarah interrupted, displaying one final document. "This internal memo from your firm specifically discusses using personal attacks to pressure injured workers into settling. It even suggests targeting single parents because they are more likely to accept a quick settlement." The jury gasped. One juror, a single mother herself, crossed her arms and glared at Wheeler. Sarah gathered her documents calmly. "This was never just about my injury. It was about a systematic effort to hide equipment failures, protect profits, and silence injured workers. Mr. Wheeler didn't mock me because I'm a single mother. He mocked me because his firm's strategy manual told him to." As she returned to her seat, Sarah saw Wheeler slump in his chair, his career and his firm's reputation crumbling before his eyes. The truth she had uncovered was far bigger than just her case. It was an entire system of deception exposed by one mother's determination to find justice. On the final day of the trial, the courtroom was packed. News of Wheeler's exposed corruption had spread, and several reporters sat in the back row with their notebooks ready. Sarah's children sat with Lisa in the front row, both wearing their best clothes. Emma clutched her mother's favorite scarf for good luck, while Tommy held tight to his matching Superman keychain. Judge Henderson called the court to order. Wheeler sat at his table alone. His junior associates had mysteriously called in sick, not wanting to be associated with the coming verdict. His perfectly pressed suits and arrogant smirk were gone, replaced by wrinkled clothes and dark circles under his eyes. Has the jury reached a verdict? Judge Henderson asked. The jury forewoman stood, holding a single piece of paper. "We have, Your Honor." Sarah felt Lisa squeezing her hand from across the barrier. She could hear Tommy whisper, "Mommy's gonna win," to his sister. In the case of Mitchell versus City General Hospital, regarding the claim of negligence and workplace injury, we find in favor of the plaintiff, Sarah Mitchell. A wave of relief washed over Sarah's face, but the jury wasn't finished. Furthermore, the forewoman continued, "We recommend a full investigation into Wheeler and Associates' handling of similar cases. We award Ms. Mitchell compensation for medical expenses, lost wages, and pain and suffering in the amount of $750,000. Wheeler slumped forward, but the forewoman raised her voice slightly. "Additionally, we award punitive damages in the amount of $2 million to serve as a warning to hospitals and legal firms who prioritize profit over worker safety." The courtroom erupted in applause. Judge Henderson banged her gavel, restoring order, but she was smiling slightly. "Ms. Mitchell," the judge said, "your thorough preparation and dedication to uncovering the truth has exposed serious ethical violations. I am referring Mr. Wheeler and his firm to the State Bar Association for investigation." Wheeler stood shakily. "Your Honor, we plan to appeal." "Save it, Mr. Wheeler." Judge Henderson cut him off. "The evidence of your firm's misconduct is overwhelming. I'm also ordering an immediate safety review of all hospital equipment and implementing new reporting protocols based on Ms. Mitchell's documentation system." Sarah's children couldn't contain themselves any longer. They ran past the barrier, wrapping their arms around their mother. Emma's tears soaked into Sarah's blouse, while Tommy kept repeating, "I knew you'd win, Mom, I knew it." As the courtroom began to clear, Several jury members stopped to shake Sarah's hand. The nurse on the jury hugged her, whispering, "You did this for all of us." The single mother juror gave her a knowing smile and a thumbs up. 3 months later, Sarah stood outside City General Hospital, looking at the new safety protocols posted on the wall, protocols that bore her name. The Mitchell Safety Documentation System. The patient lift that had injured her had been replaced, along with all similar equipment in the hospital. A dedicated safety officer now monitored all maintenance requests. Wheeler's law firm had dissolved after the state bar investigation revealed decades of unethical practices. Wheeler himself had lost his license to practice law. The equipment manufacturer had issued a nationwide recall, preventing countless potential injuries. Sarah adjusted her nurse's uniform. She had returned to work part-time while studying healthcare law at night. Her case had inspired her to become a patient advocate lawyer, helping other healthcare workers fight for their rights. "Ready to go home, Ms. Mitchell?" asked Mike Rogers, who had been rehired as the head of maintenance with full back pay and a raise. His new office had a plaque that read "Safety first, budget second." "Almost," Sarah smiled, checking the new electronic maintenance reporting system she had helped design. Everything was working perfectly. As she walked to her car, she passed the hospital's updated mission statement, newly engraved on the wall. At the bottom was a quote that made her smile every time. "Justice and safety go hand in hand, S. Mitchell." Her phone buzzed, a text from Emma. "Did you win any more battles today, Mom?" Sarah looked back at the hospital, thinking of all the changes her case had brought about. "Not today, sweetie," she typed back. Today, everyone won. In her rearview mirror, she could still see Wheeler's old parking space, now converted into a small garden with a bench for patients. The plaque there read, "Dedicated to those who stand up for what's right, no matter the odds." Sarah started her car, touching the Superman keychain that still hung from her keys. Sometimes the biggest victories came from the smallest beginnings, like a single mother who refused to be mocked into silence.